All right. So we've talked a lot about the Browns having the number 2 overall pick. We talked a lot about the Browns quarterback situation being up in flux. We've talked a lot about the Browns offensive coordinator situation. We got a lot to get through for the Cleveland Browns this offseason. It's going to be one of the busiest off seasons for this franchise in quite a while, right? They have the number 2 overall pick, which is the highest they have picked since they had the number 1 overall pick in 2018. They are hiring a new offensive coordinator. They're looking for a new starting quarterback. A lot is happening in Berea this offseason. But all of that conversation has kind of made us forget that there are some pretty basic roster decisions the Cleveland Browns are going to have to make up their mind on this offseason when it comes to specific players that aren't related to the quarterback position or the offensive coordinator change. Guys that we kind of remember that we were going to have this conversation about at the beginning of the year, but since the year went the way it did, we haven't really thought about it. Well, this is me trying to bring it back up and ask you guys what you think. So I'm going to talk about it. 4 players that the Browns need to make a decision on this offseason. And we're going to start with Nick Chubb. Now, this feels like the easiest decision to make on both sides. Nick Chubb is going to be an unrestricted free agent. And if you're the Browns, he is a running back. He's getting older. He's had an injury. He has had another injury. I can see on paper why you would want to move on, or why some people would want to move on, if I'm ignoring the fact that the guy who we're talking about, his name is Nick Chubb. And that part matters a ton. His name's Nick Chubb. He is one of the best players, one of the best running backs in franchise history. We're watching right now Derrick Henry, who is one of the best running backs in Tennessee Titans history, rewrite the history books on the Baltimore Ravens over the age of 30. We're watching right now Saquon Barkley, same draft class as Nick Chubb, has had more knee injuries than Nick Chubb, tear up the league right now with a good offensive line at a similar age than Nick Chubb is right now, almost rushing for 2,000 yards. I understand the logic around what happens on the average of running backs and why a lot of people have these kind of soulless theories about the running back position, but Nick Chubb's not a regular running back. Don't use averages based on a bunch of average backs to dictate how Nick Chubb's career could go. And if you're the Browns, Nick Chubb's not going to be very expensive to keep in free agency. Nick Chubb wants to stay in Cleveland. The Cleveland Browns are very interested in keeping him here, right? We heard Nick Chubb talk about how much he loves Cleveland, how he hopes he can retire here. We've heard the Browns talk about how they see him as a Ring of Fame player and how this is somebody that they want to make sure plays in Cleveland their entire career. We heard Jimmy Haslam talk about it. There is interest on both sides to get something done. I believe they will get something done. It will be heavily incentive related. Nick Chubb's injury that he's coming back from right now is a foot injury. It's not as big as a deal as like the ACL tear, obviously. This is something that he could potentially be back up, ready to go by like February. So everything's pointed towards this being a pretty easy solve. They're going to give Nick Chubb some kind of deal. It's not going to be that expensive. It's probably going to have a ton of incentives laid in it. And they're going to move forward with Nick Chubb as a piece of this offense, especially if they're trying to go back to the old thing. I see no reason to give up on Nick Chubb. I am not trying to see Nick Chubb in a Steelers jersey and a Ravens jersey rushing for 2,000 yards. I'm good on that vision. I will trust that Nick Chubb figures it out. I trust the person. I trust the resume. He's always been one of those guys, and we're seeing all of his peers at the age of 30 or over the age of 30 be able to achieve these things that people tell me are impossible for somebody like Nick Chubb, even though Nick Chubb has achieved these things his entire career. And you can argue there have been points where Nick Chubb has been better than Derrick Henry and better than Saquon Barkley. Yeah, man, if they could do it, I know Nick can do it. So I'm not about to give up on him that easily. If you're going to bounce back, Nick Chubb's going to be a huge part of it. His leadership in the locker room, the fact that he has the respect of everybody who's ever worn a logoless orange helmet with a stripe on it. Yeah, if you want to bounce back, you want to come be a playoff team next year, I promise you 24 is going to have something to do with it. I promise you that. Because that is who Nick Chubb is. So, pretty easy decision to make there. Let's go to Greg Newsome. More interesting conversation to have. Greg Newsome is entering the last year of his contract. It's a 5th-year extension. And the Browns are in a bit of an awkward place with this. Because me personally, if somebody wants to trade for Greg Newsome, I would happily ship him off, get some cap relief, and put Cam Mitchell in that spot or draft somebody in day 3 or 2 to play the role of slot corner. It doesn't seem like they have any hopes for Greg Newsome to be a boundary corner. I mean, Martin Emerson, who we're going to talk about in this video, struggled as much as a boundary corner could this year. And they never made the decision to just put Greg over there and figure out what they're going to do with Martin later. They've actually put Cam Mitchell there instead before. So, yeah, with Greg, I just don't see the value in him on his 5th-year option. There was a time where I thought there was value when I thought the Browns were going to be much, much closer to winning a championship. But now that they're having to reset this offense, reset their expectations at quarterback, we are far away from being a championship contender. So it doesn't really make sense to be overloaded at the defensive back position like we are now, especially if it's going to be expensive, right? It's one thing when it's cheap and you have a ton of talent. It's another thing when it starts to get expensive. So for that alone, I would be happy to move off of Greg Newsome. Y'all let me know if y'all want to move on from Greg Newsome either. The next guy is another corner, MJ Emerson. Now, this is an interesting kind of crossroads that we are at. MJ Emerson had 2 great years as a Cleveland Brown and 1 really bad year. And this 1 bad year is very inconveniently placed. Because if he would have had this stinker of a year, his rookie year, it wouldn't have been a big deal. But having it 3 years in, it feels like a bigger deal. I don't know what to make of it. Is he just not good now? Did he get figured out? I kind of get tired of those kind of takes anytime a player has a down year. In the NFL, some players just have down years sometimes. They're just not as good as they usually are. Maybe something's not going right at home. Maybe they're just not at peace. Maybe there was a nagging injury that they got in camp and couldn't get fixed until the offseason, and that's why they couldn't look good. I've seen Denzel Ward have down years before, so I'm not going to act like Martin Emerson is finished as a corner because he had a down year. I think that would be a bit short-sighted. But do you still rely on? If you're sitting there and you're trying to make a tiebreaker at the 2nd pick or wherever, even if you trade back, and you're looking at your board and you got Abdul Carter, you got Mason Graham, you got Will Johnson, you got Travis Hunter, and you're trying to decide, do I go defensive line or do I go to defensive back? Do you factor in the fact that you have Martin Emerson in that conversation to break that tie? If you look at all 4 of these players as the same level of prospect, does Martin Emerson help you break that tie? Should Martin Emerson help you break that tie? That is the question with them. That's the decision the Browns need to make. Is Martin Emerson somebody the Browns see as an extension guy? Is Martin Emerson somebody that they would want to give an extension to? If the answer is yes, then Martin Emerson definitely factors into what you do at the top of the draft. And if you break the tie saying, hey, we just don't need an extra corner right now. Let's just go ahead, get the defensive line player. Or maybe he doesn't. Or maybe he does factor in on the opposite end where it's hey, we don't trust Martin. We got to get another corner. Because whoever you draft is going to have to play. You're not going to draft Travis Hunter, have him sit the bench. You're not going to draft Will Johnson, have him play slot, something like that. They're going to play. And they're going to start. And they're going to be that boundary position. So you would bench Martin if you draft one of those guys. So if Martin's part of your future, well, then you got a decision to make there. Because in this draft, there's going to be 2 dynamite corners at the top of this draft that you got to figure out. Is that where you're trying to go? Me personally, if you ask me, I'd rather draft defensive linemen in a Jim Schwartz defense, because Jim Schwartz defenses work from the bottom up, in my opinion. I think they're much better when the defensive line has more talent than you need, versus when the secondary has more talent than you need, because Jim Schwartz is way better at using multiple defensive linemen and getting the most out of them versus using a bunch of different DBs and getting the most out of them. So I know if I draft Abdul Carter, Mason Graham, Jim Schwartz is going to be able to utilize those guys, even if he has to juggle 9 different defensive linemen. If I draft another corner, I don't really know how well we're going to juggle 3 starting cornerbacks. We haven't really done a great job of it. So that's the big question there. That's what you have to figure out with Martin Emerson. Last guy on the list, Elijah Moore. Do we bring him back? Because I feel like whenever the quarterback play gets good, or not, I don't want to say good. We haven't had good quarterback play in a very long time. Whenever the quarterback play is not abysmal, we always have this same conversation with Elijah Moore, which is, hey, he's actually not that bad. He's actually kind of producing. He's having a strong end to the season. Like whenever a quarterback is competent enough to get him the ball, like he had like a good time when Jameis was out there, when Joe Flacco was out there, his production ticked up. And part of me just wonders, I'm like, hey, is that just the problem with Elijah Moore? Is that the quarterbacks he played with sucked? It's unfortunate. That was the issue with him in New York when he had Zach Wilson, but it seems to be popping up wherever he goes. Seems to be very talented. I think the other problem with Elijah Moore is this. He is a X or he is a Z in your offense. He is not a slot. So the kind of route you have to send him on, take time to develop, so you need a good offensive line to get the most out of him. And they're downfield. And he's not the biggest guy. And he's not the best 50-50 catch guy. Really good route runner, but not the best 50-50 catch guy. I think the biggest issue with Elijah Moore is that he just doesn't have the skill set to win the way that you have to play him on a consistent basis. He's not a spectacular enough hands guy to get away with being that small. He's not a physical enough 50-50 ball guy to get away with being that small. He's a great route runner, but he's not a close to the ball guy. So you can't really use him in the way that you want to use him. He has a lot of great traits and a lot of things that excite you, but he can't put together a package that is useful in an NFL offense on a consistent basis. Plus, he has the worst luck with quarterback play. Now, maybe if he goes somewhere, he gets decent luck with quarterback play, and you bring him back, or you sign him for a cheap deal, you'll like what you get out of Elijah Moore. I think he is going to be consistently on that rotation of wide receiver, like you know, the realm in which Van Jefferson lives, right? Like whoever is the Steelers' 3rd or 4th wide receiver, or the Ravens' 3rd or 4th wide receiver, like that's who Elijah Moore, his career is going to look like. He's always going to be hovering in that range where it's like, okay, you got Van Jefferson. Okay, you got, Allen Robinson, I guess now, like these guys who kind of just hover around and they're your last playable wide receiver. That's where I think Elijah Moore kind of falls into. He's not useless, but he's not as useful as you want him to be. And he's not a 1. He's not a 2. He's not a 3. He's a 4. And there ain't nothing wrong with being a 4. But the Browns did not move all the things they moved to get him for him to be a 4. And the question is, do we bring him back if he's willing to come in at a number 4 wide receiver price? And with the Browns changing the offense back to the Kevin Stefanski style, are we going to really have much use for wide receiver number 4? A lot of questions the Browns need to answer. A lot of decisions the Browns need to make. It's going to be a busy offseason. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.